You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
وتكلم من هناك لشوارزنيجر
pegarle Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! 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 ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
It's a good thing to hear that intro today, Kevin, because I've had the song Spirits by the Strumbellas in my head for about 3.5 straight days.
Well, whatever I can do to help your mental state.
Yeah, I got guns in my head and they won't go. They won't go away!
No, I've been actually, I only listen to podcasts, so I just have men talking in my ears, so I don't have those problems anymore.
Yeah, I'm part of the problem. I subscribe to Spotify, so I'm part of the reason. You don't blame the millennials. You blame me for why the music industry's dying. Anyway, how you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing pretty good. A very busy Friday, Dwayne, in the world of football with a soccer perspective. That's us, Soccer Today. Wednesday, Dwayne, we had a big slate of game, and for the first time in a long time, and it's kind of tough for me to say, especially where I'm from right now, but Toronto's in first place in the Eastern Conference.
They're in first place in the Eastern Conference, and they are in there with people are calling them the Supporters Shield frontrunners right now. They are not in first place overall, but they have caught within a game of FC Dallas. They have only 2 road games left. The longest road trip they have left is to Chicago. They have,
there's a bonus when you go to Chicago. You get to play the Fire. So.
Exactly.
Don't say that to Montreal last Saturday, though.
Well, precisely, yeah. Well, that's the TFC's 2 remaining road trips. They only have to leave They only have to leave Canada once. The rest of the season, that's to go to Chicago, which is not a very far trip for us here. That's you can drive to Chicago in about 8.5 hours from Toronto. They won't drive; they'll fly in about 45 minutes. So it's not exactly a taxing road trip. And then they have the second last week of the season. They play the Impact at Stade Saputo, the house that she's built. Lots of fun there because if you look ahead and maybe they could be clinching something. And I don't think the Impact fans will be too excited about that, Kevin.
No, and with Toronto's win Wednesday, it leaves the 4-1 derby of this Saturday not for the first spot in the East for Toronto. That was what Montreal fans were worried. Like, okay, we're going to go to Toronto and they'll win and they'll get first place. They're already there. So what Montreal can do is put a damper on the celebration and maybe get their first ever win at BMO Field. We'll see.
They could take Supporters Shield lead, but that's another question for another day. So anyway, we'll leave this conversation well enough alone. Kevin and I will probably do a special show following the 401 Derby at some point, sometime. But and we're going to shelve this right now to the end of the show where we do games of the week, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. It was an exciting weekend here in Toronto and in Canadian football, as always. But let's move on to our sports podcasting network, Soccer Today, question of the day, which is a mouthful.
Yeah,
however,
SPN's question of the day.
Yes, which is who's the rookie of the year. We're going to do this over the next little while. We're going to look at the major awards and debate who the 2/3 rookie of the year is. And basically, I took it down to 2 players. I know there's more candidates out there, but I went down to one name, basically, when I asked the question today. It's Jordan Morris. It's Jordan Morris versus everybody to steal the Detroit versus everybody and the shirts that
Jordan
Toronto
Morris
stole from
versus
Detroit.
the Buns.
Yes. So is Jordan Morris going to beat the field this year in the Rookie of the Year race, Kevin? And right now, our listeners think so, 55% to 45%. You have some other stats there and some other names. So why don't you share those and we'll have a little conversation about that.
Well, there's one player that some of our listeners have in mind as well when you talk about Rookie of the Year, but because of the position he plays on the pitch, a right back for Philadelphia. Yes, I'm talking about Keegan Rosenberry. With the performance that he did put this season, with the surprising, especially beginning of the season, Phil, he was instrumental in those victories. He stands out as a very efficient, very defensively reliable defenseman that's able to bring it forward as well. But of course, he's not as spectacular or as that offensive flair that a Jordan Morris has. So you have that disparity when it comes to awards, especially of the year type of awards. Usually offensive player have that benefit of the doubt that if you're not sure between the two, it goes to Morris.
Yeah, look, the other name that some people might throw at you is Jack Harrison, who's had a nice little season for NYCFC. A lot of people point to him as being perhaps the one of the reasons why they've been able to turn it around this year and help their older players by having a little injection of youth in there. People suspect he has a long career. Of course, English heritage there. Been in the U.S. for quite a while. He's from Stoke originally, Stoke-on-Trent originally. So, he might go back to the U.K. at some point. But Jack Harrison's the other name there. But I think you nailed it there before when you talk about this debate. And to me, there's really only one name to talk about when it's Rookie of the Year this year. It is Jordan Morris, for both the fact that I think he probably does deserve it based on the play, although I do buy the idea that a defender, that someone that plays at the back gets undervalued. I still think Morris probably, especially in the second half of the season, has been the best rookie out there. But beyond that, you have to look realistically at how these things are voted for, how these things are selected. And the hype around Morris, particularly, which we talked a lot about back when we were, it's Two Solitudes, 2S Extra Days. We talked a lot about him in that time because he's the wonder kid. He's the Wunder kid in American soccer, and they're going to want to reward that.
I just want to say thanks to Nick Anan on Twitter right now. He says that me bringing up Keegan Rosenberry in the Jordan Morris discussion is like Lisa bringing gazpacho in a Meet Omer's barbecue party.
Oh, there you go.
But you know what? It's here. It's fresh. Come and see me. Have some gazpacho.
I like gazpacho. I can't say it apparently, but I do like it.
Exactly. But no, sometimes gazpacho is better for you. And Keegan Rosenberry comes out of nowhere a little bit. So I would maybe go there, but maybe that's my contrarian inside of me that wants to come out sometimes.
Yeah, it's going to be Morris. And I mean, is that a bad thing? There's a debate. I mean, these awards are ultimately fleeting and they don't really matter. So does it matter that maybe they pick someone according to hype and how it markets the league a little bit more? Or do we have to be like very, very, very serious about these type of things, Kevin?
Well, exactly. And let's face it here. In the history of the Rookie of the Year in MLS, it's not necessarily the rookie year. It's the second, third, fourth year that we see reality step in. So we're still going to have to wait for Jordan Morris coming out party, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, name former rookies of the years. It's not exactly the easiest thing to do.
I was trying to do it, and it was hard.
Yeah, I'm gonna Wikipedia that right now as we're talking here. To sort of we'll have a little conversation. But no, you're right. The staying power behind it is the key. I mean, Marisa Dew won it in 2007. I remember that because it was a TFC player, right? But hold on, we got it right here. This is going to tie into the conversation we're going to have in a few minutes. We have Travis Clark booked from Top Door Soccer. Travis is a friend of ours, been in the show many, many times before. He's going to talk about the NCAA season this year. And so this ties in the Rookie of the Year question because that's where they come from, generally speaking. And then that's the other question about this is whether or not MLS should be giving an award that is almost entirely designed towards their draft system when their draft system is becoming less and less relevant. I talked about Harrison there a minute ago. He came through the draft, but he's a guy that maybe in a different year and in the next year is going to come through an academy, right? So to me, I would rather have the MLS Homegrown Player of the Year award. And that doesn't necessarily restrict itself to a first-year player. It could be any player that has had that homegrown designation. And I think that would be a better way to go. But that's just my own bias, Kevin.
Yeah, but it would make, because we've talked about many times about the what it seems to be a perception that the super draft is losing is not the value, but it's losing some of its depth over the years when that depth is now in the academy side and they don't necessarily have a equivalent to a Rookie of the Year for those players, because the way they are brought up and brought in is a little by little spurts, and eventually when they're older, they're not even rookies anymore, they establish themselves with the team. So they don't have a trophy to go after because they don't just come into the league already grown, quote unquote. They're products of that academy. So it would be important and maybe would give more glory or just just a trophy brings maybe more importance to a team, that if there's a guy who's in that conversation, he might get more playing minutes to make sure that he gets that trophy at the end of the season. And if it means some of homegrowns will get more minutes because there's a trophy there, well, it achieves one of the goals of the league, is to make the homegrowns play more.
Precisely. All right, I've got the list in front of me here. Some interesting trivia on this. The number one pick overall in the Super Draft's only ever won it twice. That's Kyle Larin last year, who we probably should be remiss for forgetting who won it last year. But I mean, Kyle doesn't seem like a rookie.
We dropped the ball on that one.
Yeah, Teshu won it the year before. It's back-to-back Canadians.
So we dropped the ball twice.
I did actually know that when I thought about it. It just slipped my mind at the moment. The other number one pick overall to have won it was the player that I mentioned earlier, 2007, Maurice Adu. There are some good names here, and I'll go through them in the last 10 years or so. Kyle Larin, Teshu. Dylan Powers won it in 2013. He's still sticking around. Here's one that sort of illustrates what you were saying, Austin Berry, who I do believe is playing in Cincinnati right now. So CJ Savon won it in 2011. Andy Nahar, that's the only academy player to have won it so far, was the 2010. Omar Gonzalez. He had an okay time, I think. Gonzalez said.
He was. He actually made its way from Rookie of the Year to eventually get a DB contract and eventually moving on to bigger and better things. So no, you can say he did all right. Sean
Franklin, Maurice Adu, Borenstein, Parkhurst, Dempsey. There's another name that did okay for himself, I think, after the fact.
Well, with all the names that you mentioned, Duane, it's almost 50-50. 50-50 become great players. Some of them became game changers, but majority of them just became players.
Exactly. Bocanegra's on here. Jay Heaps, Ben Olsen, a couple coaches. Steve Ralston. So this is interesting in the early days. Steve Ralston was the first rookie of the year. How do you have a rookie of the year in the MLS's rookie season? How did that work?
Oh, they're all rookies now? Aren't they all rookies? So it's like the best player, basically, is the rookie of the year that year.
Yeah. Chivas USA's only major award, Jonathan Bernstein. Anyway, that's where you go.
Seriously? It's their only major award ever? Like, the only trophy they ever had was the rookie of the year for that player?
I believe so. They did actually. They won the Western Conference in the regular season.
Okay.
I don't know whether they give a trophy for winning the Western Conference in the regular season though, but they did actually. People forget that about Chivas, and Alicia will tell this too if you ask her. Is that they weren't as horrible as people remember. They actually were back to back when Preki was there. They did pretty well, which proves Preki can manage a bunch. I don't know if Preki can manage MLS anymore, but certainly back then he had his abilities. He had TFC. Doing pretty well before it all blew up in his face there, and that wasn't really his fault. That was those that are here know that other stuff was going on around that team. So lots of dysfunction.
Yes, no, exactly. Well, it'll be interesting because yes, it's the 2/3 of the season. Let us know which player you would vote for if you had a vote for the Rookie of the Year. Let us know by email, sportspodcastingnetwork@gmail.com, on Twitter @sportspodnet.
All right, fair enough. And just I'm quickly looking through some of the the colleges that won the Rookie of the Year here. Obviously, the best one ever was TSU and the Colorado School of Mines, which is the greatest school to win Rookie of the Year ever, I would have to say. Most of them are Phil Lakota from Connecticut, Notre Dame, Louisville, James Madison, UCLA. There's lots of those kind of stuff up there. So I think UCLA has the record for most. I'm trying to think if there's any doubles in here. I see UCLA twice, but I don't see anyone else twice. So there you go. Oh, actually, Virginia has a couple. All right, that's enough talk of that. Today, as I said, our guest is going to be Travis Clark. And we talked about this the other day when we were sort of asking you to give us your input on whether you wanted college soccer. What it came down to when I looked at this is that there, as I said, there was a significant minority that doesn't want any. And I hear you. And it's not my favorite type of soccer either. There's a lot of quirks to the college game, the countdown clock, unlimited subs in and out, stuff like that makes it, it changes the fabric of the game, right? When you have unlimited subs, you're just going to play high press all game because you can just take your players out when you need to. So that's changing the type of game that's happening out there, which is one of the bigger problems people have with it. And there's movements within NCAA on the men's side in particular to try and make some changes to more closely align it to the pro. There's an interesting conversation there to be had, and we're going to explore that in the days ahead. We'll probably ask Travis a little bit about that off the top too. But bottom line is when I concluded when it relates to us is that it deserves some level of attention because this is a pool. It's not the biggest pool. It's not the deepest pool, but it is a pool which MLS draws players from. So we will provide it with some attention. We'll also provide some attention to CIS, which is the Canadian University System up here in Canada, for those that don't know. I don't know where to place it. I think it's getting better, CIS. I'm going to probably take it upon myself to be the one that follows that a little bit more. We might get some experts here and there. And that's kind of my plan. I'm not going to have weekly coverage on this stuff, but maybe every couple of weeks if there's something relevant going on. Certainly if a story happens down there, and certainly we'll probably check in a more serious interview in the middle of the season and at the end of the year as well. So that's kind of where I came with this, Kevin. I don't know whether you disagree with that or the listeners do, but that seems like a fair one. Yeah. All right, let's take a break. It might be a minute or so while we get Travis on the line, and we'll be back and have that conversation.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
The last time he was on the show, it was live from the draft floor of the MLS Super Draft. Now, Travis Clark joins us once again. Travis, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. How you guys doing?
It's pretty good. I'm missing some of that background pop music. Could you get some really bad, loud pop music on in the background so I feel we're having it again?
I'm gonna pass. I am doing a little laundry and I have pretty noisy pipes, so that's the best you guys are gonna get from me time around. All
right, my girlfriend was playing Britney this morning, so I'll have to live with the memories. All right, Travis, let's start with before we threw to you. I was mentioning some of the proposals that are in play to maybe change the fabric of how the NCAA season plays out and how there's sort of a divide in thinking there between the men's and the women's side. Can you kind of set the groundwork and give a little bit of a notes for people that aren't familiar with what's happening there and talk about what's going on in terms of the progress of those proposals?
Right. So I guess it was about a few years ago, this idea was proposed, suggested by mostly we're talking a Division I men's contingent to basically expand the season but play the same amount of games just over a longer amount of time. Where you're going from the truncated NCAA season where they play, start this weekend for the men and end the second weekend of December, jamming in 20, 25 games, in a short window. And the idea is to play a similar number of games. I believe it's about the same, but, extend it so you're playing one game per week, starting a little bit later in the fall, and then going on sort of a month or two hiatus. I'm not even sure how long the break would be. And then playing maybe say 10 more games in the spring season. So the Division I men's coaches are really behind this. Division I women's coaches, I know there are some interest, but it's obviously a lot more lukewarm. There are more schools that sponsor Division I women's. I think I believe it's about 330, and then there's 200 and some men's. So those numbers could be way off. Forgive me if they are. But basically the NSCA, which is the National Soccer Coaches Association of America, is kind of backing this as the NCAA men's coaches are trying to push this through via whatever political or, mechanisms they have to pass through, which, from my perspective, I'm skeptical it would ever come to pass simply because there are just so many interests that clash with it. There are schools, sports share fields with schools, support staff question. There's so many questions about it that it's either going to take another few years to even come close to being voted on. I think I could be wrong. This is sort of my gut, and what I've heard in passing. Division I men's coaches have told me they think it will eventually pass. It's just a matter of when. Again, who knows if it actually will? And I will always be skeptical until. Like the DC United Stadium, until you see the actual shovels and the thing going up. It's not happening until you see official announcements.
It's the old adage is that you don't count your player signings until you see them holding up the strip in a badly staged photograph. Kind of that idea, right, Travis?
Exactly. The rumors will abound and there will be lots of bluster and talk about it. It's a good idea on some levels, but, when you're looking at college soccer, the NCAA just doesn't oversee Division I. There are Division II, Division III schools that factor into some consideration to this. When people talk about the sub rule, part of the reason the sub rule is a difficult thing to amend is you have to make it something that Division II and Division III schools, which, their primary focus is for a kid's education. And, for most Division I schools, that's what it is. So it raises the question, okay, well, if we're going to do this, does that mean that these are becoming, and, those are all like dubious NCAA things when you look at football and basketball. So, I think it's a good idea. It makes a little sense that most club players in North America go from a 10-month schedule to a shorter season. You can even look at the absurdity that MLS is shorter than the Development Academy season in some regards. I haven't actually broken it down, but at least over the calendar year time that it goes through, the Development Academy, which is the U.S. Soccer Federation's league that Montreal and Vancouver both compete in. It's August to May, June really, if you're even July if you're looking at championships. So it's kind of a bizarre thing that so many kids here in the U.S. are playing these huge schedules, and then they their next step for 95% of them is this bash them up 2-3 month season. And there are beyond development, there are health and academic issues at stake. There's less travel if you're playing one game a week, and you would miss less coursework if that's there's a strong credence to be made for that. So it's a complicated, as all things are with the NCAA and sport governing politic bodies, so much hoops and question marks and what's really going on, that kind of a thing. So I know I'm kind of blabbering on here, but I hope that touches on it at least a little bit.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, you at Top Drawer Soccer, you follow the recruits a lot, like who's coming in. Would you say, and obviously with the men's side of things, I think they're worried that they're going to lose some of their influence in the overall development scheme, and they want to make changes to sort of reflect what professional clubs make. And I think that's probably where the divide comes, because there's less professional opportunities for women, so they don't quite see it in the same pressing way that the men's coaches may see. So just in general, Travis, when you look at the recruiting classes coming in, are they getting weaker? Are more men, on the men's side in particular, are they more of them likely to go the academy route now, or are you not seeing many changes?
So I would say this is the 2016 kids. There's probably, this is my 5th college season working at Top Drawer. I followed college soccer beyond that. This is probably one of the most significant, I don't want to say drains, because there's plenty of players still going to these schools who are good. Like it's sort of this bizarre dichotomy where, yeah, a lot of these top American players are hedging their bets and looking to go to the college system, and good for them. But I posted this on Twitter earlier. It's like 26 or 29 of our top recruits are bypassing college completely. And I think it was like only 10 or 11 of those were actually had one point made a public commitment to that they were going to school. Like Christian Pulisic, which your listeners will probably know the best of the terms of the younger players, he was never going to play college soccer. But going beyond that, and I know I'm being U.S. heavy here, so forgive me for your audience. But just as an example, of the 20, I believe it's the 23 players on the U.S. U17 World Cup squad from a year ago, is I think it's either something like 17 or 18 of these kids are actually playing college soccer. Or no, sorry, I have that wrong. Only like 4 or 5 of them are actually playing college soccer. And, 2 or 3 of those could still end up making decisions. So that in and of itself is a reflection of, you go back, let's say, the 2009 World Cup team, which has had players, Harry Kitchen was on that team, for an example. That's the kind of, I think Luis Gil was, like 10, at least 10 to 15 of those kids ended up playing college at one point or another. So that's sort of a good way to look at it and say, okay, this is what's happening. Part of it is also the U.S. coaching staffs are raising the drumbeat more on these male prospects to go and play in a professional environment, for better or for worse when we're looking at it. Because if you're talking Major League Soccer, there are plenty of development questions that are still to be raised, issues that are still coming up. So maybe college is still the best environment. Some of these kids, whatever, that's debate that could go on for infinite amount of time. But that again, I'm being long-winded here again. But the answer to your question is, I would say yes. But now the flip side to that, I'll be quick on this point. There are a lot of foreign players who are showing interest. Kids from England and Germany, soccer, there's a kid from Barcelona who's going to, play Wake Forest, for example. You look at Jack Harrison, these are guys, even though he was here in the U.S., there's a lot of foreign players. I talk to coaches all the time. There's huge interest in kids that want to come here and play college soccer while also getting a chance to study and complete at least partial, degree here in the States. So that's an interesting element. While there is a drain of the domestic U.S. talent, in some ways, a lot of that's being made up with these kids from Europe and, South America, Central America, even if they have, the requisite English, they can end up coming here and, get that sort of college and, college soccer and the academic element too.
Now, when we look at this season that's upcoming, we have the number one ranked probably team in the country, which was last year, Stanford. The Cardinals are going to miss their best players of last year, have graduated to the professional level, especially Jordan Morris, which we talked about, the outstanding leader in the Rookie of the Year conversation right now in Major League Soccer. What do you think about the Cardinal this year and even the Zips? Because Akron has been an outstanding program for over a decade now, back then with the likes of Caleb Porter, Zarek Valentin, Derek Nagby, and those crop of players. What do you think about those two teams in 2016-17?
Both should be pretty good. I think the bigger drop-off will be at Stanford. They'll be a tough team to break down, but along with losing Morris, they lost Brandon Vincent, who was their starting left back, and an outstanding player that's had his ups and downs with the Fire. Granted, I'll admit to have not watching him very much this season, as watching the Chicago Fire seems like a dastardly chore.
You don't have to justify yourself there, Travis.
Yeah, exactly. No offense to any Fire fans who may be listening, but I'm sure they wouldn't be too disagreeable with me.
I'm sure they would agree with you.
So they have a couple of returning players. Corey Baird comes to mind. He's a kid that came through Real Salt Lake's Arizona Academy, and honestly, a lot of their success this season will fall to how good he can be to sort of create, to score goals, and that's a lot to ask for one player. But they've got a number of players at the back. And their coach is Jeremy Gunn does a very good job drilling his team to be more defensive minded. So you could see them play a little bit more, conservative bunkering that you see in the college game pretty regularly. So UCLA was voted as the favorite in the Pac-12, and they have, obviously on paper, as they do seem to have every year, the better team. So I would expect to see them perhaps replace Stanford in the national title conversation. As far as Akron goes, the Zips have lost a lot. Richie Larea obviously was a great player for them, dynamic up front. He's down in Orlando playing for Orlando City's USL team, and obviously, a Canadian, and so he's probably familiar to your listeners. His little brother is actually going to be playing for Akron this fall. I'm not sure how much he will end up, but the question for them will be, who's going to score the goals, because they had, speaking of this early talent drain, a U.S. under-20 international, Manu Sabi, was supposed to be part of the recruiting class, and he recently signed for La Liga side Las Palmas. So, obviously he won't be available for them this fall. So the question becomes, okay, can they get enough goals? Can they do the damage that way? Because they'll have, they're like Stanford, they'll be well coached. Jared Emick's done a great job, took them back to the College Cup last fall, came up short against Stanford, I believe. And Adam Najem looked like he was going to be leaving early too, but he's a kid with Red Bull ties and will probably be part of another smorgasbord of homegrown signings by the Red Bulls after the end of the college season. So I don't know if I would pencil those two back in the College Cup. It should be a pretty wide open season for the men overall, but you'll see some of the familiar names, the UCLAs, the Marylands, but you'll probably also see one or two teams kind of emerge, maybe for a little bit more obscurity, kind of like in 2014 when Providence and UMBC both made it to the College Cup.
Well, that was my next question, Travis. Is there a crop of recruits for one team in particular that interests you, that maybe prop this team to bigger results this year compared to their last years? Is there a team with the recruitment really impressed you this offseason?
Yeah, certainly. Akron's recruits are great, even without Sabi. They have a couple of Sigma kids, Reggie L'Oreal, like I mentioned, Richie's little brother. But one other kid, Marcel Zajac, another Sigma FC product, will probably end up seeing significant minutes for them this fall. kind of a creative, crafty attacking. A lot of the recruiting this year, you see a lot of the same players or same programs, doing really well. North Carolina, for example, has brought in one of the best classes, and like other programs, they have questions to answer and things they need to address in order to kind of establish their title credentials, I guess is the best way to put it. And they've got a group of players coming in that will certainly make an impact. Cam Lindley's a U.S. player in the midfield who I've just watched over the past few years. That's played with the Chicago Fire Academy, sort of on and off. And he'll bring something to the collegiate game that should be pretty exciting. So, Maryland brought in a couple of transfers. They added a German kid from USC Upstate, and if you guys know where that is, congratulations. I barely know where that is. Gordon Wild, this left-footed German striker. Virginia added Virginia's midfield sort of general, Jake Rosansky, thought he was going to go pro and then decided that he would just transfer, and he ended up being added by Maryland, so he should help them out in the midfield after they lost. The schools here in the States always seem to add, the same ones that have that academic reputation. Stanford's actual recruiting class is interesting because they have a lot of good recruits for 2017 lined up, but not the kind of pickup that you would expect for 2016, especially losing a guy like Jordan Morris. So, UCLA brought in a couple of good kids. One of the US U17 goalkeepers from that team that I mentioned, the U17 World Cup team, Kevin Silva. He's one of the few guys that will be playing college soccer. He'll be at UCLA this fall, and likely their starting goalkeeper. So how he adjusts and how he adapts, goalkeeper was one of the big issues for UCLA a year ago. And if he can answer that question, that will go a long way in addressing some of those issues. And the other teams, Washington up in the Pac-12 also seems to do pretty well with its recruits. I think I mentioned Virginia. I'll touch on Virginia a little bit, but they're always able to lure in domestic talent at one point or another. And they manage. You do see that, and coaches do tell you that most really think that domestic talent alone won't win, and they need a foreign player here or there. So you're seeing a lot more of that, where you have these powerhouse programs, and then they, via contacts or overseas scouting, end up bringing in players from Spain or Germany or England. So it's a very interesting element to the collegiate season. And obviously Canada, if there are players here and there too, but the impact of high-end talent is more so on the women's side than men's in college soccer.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I want to turn our attention to the women's side now to end our conversation. Obviously, there's a couple Canadian stories here, particularly West Virginia, which is one of the top ranked teams going heading into this season, and the two Canadian internationals that anchor that back line. But before we get there, real quickly on that U20 World Cup, how much is that impacting this season for the soccer, for the women's side of the game?
Yeah, no, it has a massive impact because the U.S. Soccer Federation decided to hand down, requested it that all the U.S. players that would be named on the roster to sit out the season. So, there you have, I didn't do a final tally, but I think it's like 19 or 20 of the 23 players are, they are collegiate players that will miss an entire season. And these are some of your best players. Now, there are some of the U.S. players turned it down and said, no, thanks. I don't fancy a trip to Papua New Guinea for the World Cup, and, fair play to them. But that I mentioned the wide openness of the men's game. Duke and Stanford kind of emerge a little bit head and shoulders above the rest because of the players they retained, both from last season, the recruits they brought in, and then the players that they didn't lose from the U20 World Cup. So the Canadian side of things is different because they decided that, hey, we're going to let these kids work it out with their respective schools. And I know that some actually decided to take off the semester. Sarah Yeka, for example, the outside back, I believe she's had some experience with a full national team, but she's penciled in for a spot for the U20s, and she decided that she would sit out the entire season at Michigan. So that impacts, I was actually just thinking about that, looking at West Virginia's roster. And now, obviously, Buchanan and Lawrence are the names that most players know, but I think there are 2 or 3 players in contention for the national team for the World Cup squad. And West Virginia are certainly, I would say, a dark horse, especially with Buchanan and Lawrence, to, make a run at the College Cup. But, the College Cup will come around the time when the U20 World Cup is happening. So, Riley Foster, their freshman goalkeeper that started early start of the season, she won't she could potentially miss it out. I'm not sure of their age eligibility, but Carla Portillo, Amandine Pierre-Louis, forgive my pronunciation. Those are players that could end up, bolting because of this competition. So that'll have an interesting sort of wrinkle as the season progresses, and maybe like I mentioned with the men, we see a little bit more of a randomness, implications on the title race. And I do know for a fact, this will be of interest, that Jessie Fleming is expected to not play for the U20s, and she should be with UCLA for the rest of the season, as far as I understand, barring any friendly call-ups to the full team.
I suspect that if you look at the CSA's rationale on that she's just a full senior right now, and they want to blood some more players at the U20 level. I suspect it's sort of thinking there. I have a lot of listeners that are big Syracuse fans up here just because of where we are. Travis, can you just touch on them before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I don't know as much about their women's program as I do the men's. Forgive me for that, but the women's program faces obviously the uphill battle of trying to become a competitive side in the ACC, which, if you look at the programs, in the women's game from top to bottom, those tend to be, kind of the cream of the crop, the best of the best, if you will. So, it'll be another interesting season for them as they try to kind of carve out that niche. I guess just add a few more wins to the win column is sort of the goal. I'd be curious. I haven't talked to the coaches, staff up there, at a lot of programs especially, but I'd be curious to know, of these under, I guess the bottom half of the conferences, if you will, their coaching staffs, kind of curious how they approach each season. Do they just go on the road, they bunker, they try to play a particular brand of soccer and kind of really, or do they try to open things up, try to match the Virginias, the Florida States? So it's they did bring in a pretty quality recruiting class that I think should give the program a lift. The question is, how much of a lift will that be in terms of, will it be until it's sort of a mid-range? Will they make the ACC tournament? Those are the kinds of questions that you'd probably hear around the program. They obviously have some intriguing players. One of the girls that, she's not Canadian, but she's from Maine and commuted to the Boston area for a club soccer. You get all kinds of, crazier stories like that. So, yeah, obviously the ties to your region up there are fascinating as well. And I do know of 2 or 3 players on the men's side who should also have a big impact. Toronto FC Academy, former TFC Academy player Sergio Camargo actually transferred up there on the men's side. So they'll probably be a little bit more competitive in terms of title conversations. But, on the women's side, they're probably just aiming to keep the momentum going for the season.
All right, Travis, we thank you for your time today. We're running out of time, unfortunately. Hopefully we'll get you back in the days ahead as the NCAA season continues. Top Door Soccer is where to find him. Thanks again, Travis.
No problem. Thanks, guys. Anytime.
You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS postgame show, Open Lines After Dark, 5 Rings Daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
Thanks again to Travis for taking some time. That's a lot of material to get through in a short amount of time, Kevin. So I don't, you can only really do a surface when you're doing an overview interview like that. As I said, I think that if we have 25 blocks a week, 50 blocks every 2 weeks, you think about it that way, we can probably spare a block every 2 weeks to the NCAA game this season. Eh?
We should be able to. Yeah,
exactly. All right, but what we do need to focus on now in the remaining time on this block is on the UEFA Champions League groups draw, which happened yesterday. Look, I mean, this is a reflection of UEFA's change to put the champions in. It's all right. Boo, boo. I'm a City fan. I'm supposed to do that.
Well,
Boo.
Speaking of City, maybe one of the difficult groups they find themselves in once again. Again, you have Barca.
Yeah, well, yeah. What I was saying is that this is a reflection that the UEFA changed the pots basically so that the champions, they really want to encourage this being a Champions League and reward championship teams. And it's hard to argue with that. But what happens is you get really mismatched groups in that case. And we're certainly seeing that here. And everyone has concluded, and I think rightfully, that Group C, which is Barcelona, Manchester City, Mönchengladbach, and Celtic, which for Celtic. But at any rate, that is the group of death. I do think that Mönchengladbach was in City's group last year, and they were tricky last year. This is what frustrates me from a pure fan perspective. Isn't so much that the group's hard; it's that I'm getting the same damn teams over and over again.
You're like, come on, give me another one. Don't give me always the same team. Give me, I don't know, Zenit for once, you know.
Yeah, variety is the spice of life. But at any rate, no, look, obviously that's a sexy matchup, the Pep Derby, so to speak. And that's what everyone was talking about yesterday, not just City fans, but certainly the whole world was talking about that one. I mean, look, there's some other tough groups in here. But by and large, there are a couple really easy touches here. But we'll go through them real quick and get our quick thoughts on them. Group A, Paris, the PSG, Arsenal, Basel, and Ludogorets. Ludogorets has Canadian content in it. That is Milan. Boyan, I couldn't name, brain fart there. Speaking of which, if you're thinking we're going to talk about the roster today, we're holding that back to next week. Just quickly, I thought we're going to have a whole show on World Cup qualifying, so don't worry. What's the first rule of it, though, Kevin? You don't need to play the clip, but
you don't talk about it.
All right. Speaking of Canadian content group, and I think that one's a pretty straightforward PSG versus Arsenal for first, and the other two are trying to battle out for that UEFA spot. Although Basel has done stuff in the past, the Swiss teams can be tricky. I
remember them beating Chelsea in the group stage once a few years ago.
They beat United as well. Benfica, Napoli, Dynamo Kiev, which is kind of a tough group. That's a sneaky tough group there. There's no real clear number one in that one. Even the Ukrainian team has done stuff in the past. Besiktas is a strong team. Canadian content there. Tibor Hutchison. Benfica, of course, is Benfica. We all know them. And Napoli is the Serie A. I'm not too sure what to ever think of Serie A in these competitions. But certainly that's maybe not a sexy group, but that is a tough top to bottom group. And in fact, I would argue, because Celtic is a pretty soft touch. Sorry, Celtic fans. It's the reality of the Scottish League right now. I would argue that top to bottom Group B is actually a little stronger than Group C. The top end talent in Group C, which we've talked about already, I think might be a little bit better. Thoughts, Kevin?
No, yeah, I have to agree with you there for sure. It's not necessarily going to be, you have like teams like Arsenal that are not necessarily having an easy path as well. No, it's going to be tricky. You have teams that are not there this year. I'm talking about, Chelsea. So it's going to be difficult for teams like from Italy and England to stomp the Spanish and German domination of this competition.
Perhaps we'll see. Group D, Bayern, Atleti, PSV, and the Russian team. That's where Rostov is from. They're from Russia. I didn't know that the other day. I don't follow the Russian Premier League.
And they're going to be fourth in that group.
Well, you would think. Although the Russian Premier League is a funny league, it's hard to really peg. You got to think Atleti. Although PSV made the knockout stage last year, Atleti and Bayern are the clear favorites. So, Group E, you've got Red Army.
Yeah, CSKA Moscow. Yeah, the former Red Army. Absolutely.
Leverkusen, Tottenham, and Monaco. That's an interesting group for the top there too, because CSKA or Red Army, as I prefer to call them, because I'm a child of the '80s. Really, they're tricky. That's a hard trip. There's three teams in that team. Even Monaco could step up. That's another pretty balanced group, but that's kind of lacking the high end star power. Group F, you've got your defending champions Real Madrid, Dortmund as Sporting, and Liga, Polish team.
Yeah,
Liga
from Varsovie, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, there you go.
And you have Madrid, Ronaldo playing against a Lisbon team, so it's going to be interesting. Sporting versus Madrid in that group stage. And Dortmund, will the GOAT say come back to Dortmund be effective for them in the Champions League? That's going to be another question.
Yeah, again, you have Sporting has not really been particularly strong in the Champions League over the past few years. They're more of a Europa League side at this point in their development, although Portugal with three teams in the group stages is a high watermark for them of late. So that's interesting as well. I'm going to skip over Group G to end the conversation with that and go to Group H right now, which is Juve, Sevilla, Lyon, and Zagreb Dynamo. They're the Croatian team. So again, you're looking at that's
the question here, Duane. Will Sevilla stay in the Champions League, or will they want to do a four-peat? and go to the Europa League and win it once again.
Speaking of the city's groups last year, they were probably the most hard done by team in that group stage last year. And I say this completely open to the fact that Manchester City was lucky as hell in the group stage last year. They beat them both legs, but they didn't deserve to win either game. And that was Sevilla's fate. I would put them as favorites to go through there. The Ligue is kind of beyond PSG, not the strongest league of late. Lyon, I'm not sure whether they have enough to catch up the Croatian team. I'm just going to set aside there for now as probably the likely fourth and move from there. So I would put Sevilla as co-favorites with Juve in that group, actually. But now, I wanted to...
Group G, Duane. They got lucky.
Yeah, they did. Look, this is the weakest Champions League group I ever can remember. And that's probably being disrespectful to Leicester, but let's be honest here. They're a first-time Champions League team. They're an unexpected champion. Because they were an unexpected champion, they got put in Pot A. Normally, Pot A would have had both Arsenal and Man City in it, right, from the English teams, but they were both put into Group B, which is why they both have top teams in their groups, and they're not in a group like Leicester. So that's the difference, right? Leicester would normally be in Group D. They would have been in the final group had they gone in under last year's rules. So they would have been in with like two strong teams. I don't know if you're a Leicester fan, whether you're excited by this group because there's a potential to qualify, or whether you're kind of disappointed because you might in the back of your mind think we're never going to get a chance to be back here anytime soon.
Because you might be eliminated by Porto and Bruges. Maybe that's why you're afraid.
When FCK isn't a laughing matter either. Copenhagen is a strong club that's had some Champions League success before too. So I would say that it's an intriguing group. I would put Porto as the favorite in there with Leicester's a chance to get in as that second team. In fact, I'd put Leicester as the second choice. And again, to get back to my original point, like would you rather as a Leicester fan have drawn a Barca, had drawn a Real Madrid so you could have that night, so you could have that trip? I mean, that's kind of the question there, Kevin. But there's your Champions League draw. You probably are sick of hearing about it by now because it's a day late, and everyone talks about this stuff. But we'll certainly be following the Champions League closely all year. But right now, we need to take a break and get back to North America with our games of the week right after the break.
You are listening to SPN Radio, powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
Well, welcome back.
Yes.
Welcome back. I heard an echo in my own mind. I had the voices in my head were talking to me, Kevin.
As long as you don't answer them in your head, you should be fine.
All right. Tight show because a lot of material with Travis there, and I hope you enjoyed that interview. But we'll jump right in with both feet here into the games of the week. And we talked already about Montreal and Toronto. Quickly before we end there, where does this rank? Is this does this derby, this 401 derby, which we've talked a lot about it being oversaturated? This game, by the way, I did the numbers on this the other night for something else. Well, yeah, it sold out. But no, what I was saying is that. With the game tomorrow, Montreal will become Toronto's all-time most played opponent. They will finally pass Columbus tomorrow.
It will make sense, though. But the fact that Montreal needed, 4 years less than Columbus to achieve that, just speak to the fact that they play each other often.
Yeah, this will be the 28th time that the two teams have played dating back. Although, funny enough, they didn't play for an entire season, and people forget that almost right now. 2011 season, TFC and Montreal did not play because they didn't draw each other in the Canadian Championship, and they didn't play each other for an entire year. But they've certainly made up for it after that. But anyway, so there you go. Montreal, Toronto have played each other more than any other team. Well, I'm sure it's Montreal's all-time number one opponent in MLS for sure.
That would make sense, yes. But it's going to be interesting. It's going to be sold out at BMO Field. If Montreal would have won and got more results out of the last two games, this might have been for the Eastern Conference top, but Montreal dropped some points at home in their last two games, only one in this possibility of 6. They lost 3-0 to Chicago and then draw 1-1 against DC United last Wednesday. So this game is even more important because if they want to keep themselves in the conversation with their teams above and not look in the rear mirror in their team below, they need a result at BMO Field, and they never won there.
Well, as you like to point out, or maybe you don't like to point it out, but yeah, as you do.
I like to point it out so when it happens, I can say that they finally won BMO Field.
Yes, exactly. They will eventually, I'm sure. I'm not sure.
One day, Duane, one day.
One day. You're waiting for that playoff game. Certainly, you've had a playoff game in Montreal now, as we all know. So there you go. Montreal's undefeated against Toronto in playoff games against each other. That's the thing about from the Montreal perspective this weekend, though, is this would be a big game for them if they were playing San Jose, right? Like this, they just need points at this point. They're on a bit of a spiral down, and I suspect that they'll be using the Toronto aspect to motivate the players, which I don't know whether that works or not, but I'm sure that they'll be playing that up, that, they don't want to lose to the rival. They don't want to help Toronto, win an Eastern Conference, potentially even chase the Supporters' Shield. They want to be that spoiler role, but at the same time, they just need points for them to solidify themselves in that. They don't really want to be on the road for that play-in game. I don't know if they can catch second place at this point in time. Maybe they can still if they get hot enough, but they're just ultimately going to want to claw their way back up those standings, Kevin. So it's a big game that way, not so much because it's the rival, in my opinion, right?
Exactly.
All right. Let's go through the rest of the MLS games quick here. Home team listed as first always. DC, Chicago. Okay.
Well, tonight we have RSL Colorado. Tonight at 8 p.m. But yes, tomorrow, 7 p.m., Chicago at DC.
The Rocky Mountain Cup tonight. Yes, who could forget that? Columbus, San Jose. That's a thriller. Houston, Dallas, the Texas Derby, because it is, of course, Heineken Rivalry Week. Philadelphia's
LA and Vancouver have such a rivalry doing.
Such a history.
Philly and SPN.
They did play each other in playoffs once, I suppose you could say that. Vancouver once again is demonstrated to be the poor sister of the Cascadia rivalry when it comes to that. The rival is Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver. It's the little brother tagging along in the background. I'm pissing off the Vancouver fans when I say this. I know, but at any rate,
yeah, exactly.
The epic battle, the epic rival of rivalries, the Philadelphia Sporting Kansas City, of course.
What would you name that derby? What's the name of that derby?
Derby? I don't know. It's no Derby there. It's no Derby or Farby, as the Extra Time Radio guys tried to get going a couple years ago. A Farby being a derby of a long distance. Anyway, the English listeners hate it when we call derbies anything that aren't in the same city, in which case there's only two in all of MLS, or one in all of MLS right now. NYRB is going to be playing New England on Sunday. We got Portland, Seattle, as I mentioned, and Orlando, NYCFC, and I guess the expansion derby.
At least, I would call it the expansion derby, the 15 expansion derby.
There you go. Anything jump out other than the Canadian matchups in this one, Kevin?
Well, for standings implication, the Red Bulls kind of need to continue and get points. So that game against New England at home, Red Bulls should be able to take advantage of the home field, the famous home field, and get points against New England. They need it because NYCFC on the road, if they continue to be hot, Toronto have demonstrated that Orlando, it's a place you can actually get points. So if New York goes to Orlando and do what we think they will with the victory, they'll just continue to prove that they're for real.
Yeah. I'm looking at this, and obviously I think the Rocky Mountain Cup tonight is, as is being played up quite a bit actually in MLS circles, it's probably the biggest matchup between these two teams in a long time. It's hard to, I don't know, we're nowhere near it, so it doesn't seem like this driving intense derby, but actually when you look at the history of it, there's been a lot of bad blood in that game. So that's one I'll look forward to watching before I go play my own soccer tonight at 10 o'clock. So I'll have that one on the phone for sure while I'm traveling down there. In terms of obviously the Seattle-Portland game, it's talk about oversaturation. And I know if you're in Cascadia, you love these things and you love the big displays and you love everything around that. But everyone else is kind of like, okay, you're playing again. So that's my feeling on that. And it's my feeling in general, but all of MLS in this Heineken rivalry week nonsense is they play it up too much and they kill it. It's like if you hug the kitten too much, you strangle it, right? Like, don't strangle the kitten.
No kitten were harms in the recording and broadcasting of this show, by the way.
Precisely. He's just staring at me. The kitten is what he's doing right now. The mascot studio audience is very quiet today. All right, let's move to unless you have any final thoughts on that, Kevin. We'll move to the NASL. All right, if I could get the NASL schedule to load here, which is always a challenge, guys, at the HTML division there. Could you fix this, please?
By the time you get this, I'll quickly go with the Premier League, with the games tomorrow on the docket, 7:30 tomorrow morning. Spurs at Liverpool, the 10 a.m. games. Chelsea, Burnley, Crystal Palace, Bournemouth, Everton, Stoke, Leicester, Swansea, Southampton, Sunderland, Watford, Arsenal, Hull, Man United. Will Hull continue their great beginning of the season? And will Zlatan kill another small team? That's very possible, Duane. Sunday, West Brom, Middlesbrough, Man City, West Ham on Sunday.
Precisely. Lots of fun stuff there. I'll be up early to watch that stuff tomorrow, as I always am. I got the schedule up now here. The red hot FC Edmonton, they're at home against Puerto Rico in what would have to be an absolute must win if they want to consider themselves a championship team. You have an expansion derby as well in the the NASL side with Ottawa and Indy playing each other. So that's both of those games are on Sundays because Edmonton always plays its games on Sunday, which must be a bugger for the travel for the teams coming in, by the way.
Hey, that's what's called the Edmonton advantage. We're so far away that we give you one more day to come here.
Yeah, that means you have to travel on a Monday to get home, lose a day of practice.
There you
anyway.
go. It's the advantage.
All right. Cosmos, Railhawks, Rowdies, Areo, Miami, Minnesota. And I mentioned the two games on Sunday. There's some midweek games in NASL next week as well as we start to grind towards the conclusion of both of these seasons. Kevin?
Exactly. Edmonton still in contention for the combined, if not actual lead, I believe.
Exactly. All right, we didn't really mention anything jumps out in the Premier League schedule. I'm just looking at it real quick. It's kind of a bit of a blah weekend. Spurs-Liverpool is obviously, I think, the big matchup, and that's a product that you're seeing a lot of that now with the American television and the big deal that they signed with NBC, that a lot of these huge matchups happen early in the season, and they do that to pump up the year, right? Like the Manchester Derby is coming up soon, which is like I want to scream. I need longer to prepare for that.
It's important, but you don't feel that it's important because you feel you just started the season, but you're not going to play this team more than just once again this year. So it is important if you want to not lose those points, because that's the important thing, right? When two big clubs are facing each other, what you don't want to do is make them gain points. That's the biggest goal there.
Yeah, no, precisely.
You don't actually mind doing a draw against like in a derby because, well, they're not getting the full 3 points.
No, and you don't lose. Yeah, it's
exactly.
the sister kissing.
As long as you take care of the I don't want to say it, but as long as you take care of the 15 minutes, and I don't say this disparately, but that's the case. If you're a top 5, you have to get those points. Once you get them against each other, it's not that important after that.
Yeah. The influence of television, though, I understand why this irritates me. Like I said, that irritates me. I don't want to see these big games. Like they do. They put a lot of them right off the top, and it's like you're almost not mentally prepared for them. It's like, oh, my God, this is happening already. Like in Spurs-Liverpool isn't exactly a traditional rivalry, but it is absolutely two big teams playing each other. And Liverpool has played Arsenal to start the season, for God's sakes, right? So, yeah. I mean, these teams have to play each other eventually, but it's not random. You can't tell me it is. You can't tell me that all the big derbies are happening before the end of September.
And you can't tell me that Chelsea's playing all those smaller teams and the promoted teams as a coincidence either. They want to be back in the conversation. And when you start the season by playing smaller teams and have a chance to accumulate the points, they're tied for the league of the table right now with Man City, another team with 6 points. Well, you have a better beginning of the season than last year. So that's not a coincidence either. They're facing Burnley tomorrow, and it's now, I wouldn't say it's an easy 3 points because they had to work hard and get late equalizers and winners for Chelsea against a smaller team like Bournemouth last week. But yeah, it's going to be interesting tomorrow.
All right. Fair enough. I think on that note, as I said, if you want to give us feedback in terms of what kind of coverage you want to see in the days ahead, we have 25 blocks a week. We can fit stuff in if we need to. Let us know what your thoughts are. Let us know on what your thoughts on the NCAA are. If there's any particular teams or conferences you want us to cover. As I said, I'm going to put a focus on CIS and have a conversation about the CIS side of things next week. I don't want to ignore the CIS, which is improving every week, every year, I should say. If you look at the Olympic result, not to tie that back into that anymore, but to look at the Olympics, there was a lot of medalists came out of the CIS school. So anyone who thinks that there's not good sports happening in Canada universities is just not paying attention, Kevin. So certainly we'll give it equal treatment with the NCAA for sure.
Exactly. Until Monday for Soccer Today. Well, have a great soccer.
You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.